Hello. I'm going to sit. It doesn't seem fair that you all get to sit if I don't get to sit. First of all, I want to thank the museum here for helping us do this, and really for putting on a show that really talks about how culture really transcends borders. My understanding of Leon really comes from many, many hours of sitting around drinking wine with Leon and having conversations with him. And I'd like to say I was going to lead you through a nice, clean, linear narrative about how his art evolved, but it's not going to work like that because nothing about art is really linear in its emergence. But I hope we'll get through enough questions and answers to start out with before we get to yours, that you get some idea of how this work comes to be. Now, I'm not an artist, I'm not an art critic or an art historian, so I'll apologize in advance for anything that I say that is naive on any of those counts. I want to start out before bringing Leon out by talking to you a little bit about the history that kind of leads up to Leon. And talk about Ukraine a little bit. It's a country about the size of Texas, sometimes known as the breadbasket of Europe. The little village of Hushcha, and there is one, is about 50 miles from Poland and about 50 miles from Belarus. Depending on the century, he could have been Polish or Belarusian, but he's not. He's Ukrainian, and there's a reason that he's truly Ukrainian. Ukraine has had periods of sort of semi-autonomy on and off over the ages, and it actually is a word that means on the edge or the borderland. But somehow, in spite of all the challenges of different groups coming and going through the territory, they've really developed their own unique cultural identity. Just for reference, and the Greeks were there, the Romans were there, the Samaritans. In fact, it's said that Achilles is actually buried somewhere in Ukraine. In round numbers, about 1,000 years ago, the kingdom of the Kievan Rus was formed with capital in Kiev. And at the time, it was the Eastern Slavs' first really great civilization, and it was the largest civilization in Europe at the time. So around the time you all think of 1066 and Harold and the Battle of Hastings in England, by then the Kievan Rus had already established their kingdom. I want to jump to 1918, which was for 1 year a period where Ukraine had its independence. By 1922, they were incorporated into the Soviet Union. Then really comes the really great horrors, which kind of set up the lifetime for Leon's parents and ultimately Leon. In 1932, Stalin engineers the Ukrainian famine. Roughly 4 million Ukrainians die in a premeditated genocide. Now, mind you, Leon's parents were alive at this time. Then comes the Great Purge. Then the Nazis invade, and some Ukrainians decide that the Nazis must be their saviors and originally sign up to collaborate with the Germans, only to find out that the Germans really intended simply to use them as slave labor. The war ends in 1945, and at that point, roughly 5 to 7 million Ukrainians have been killed, and about 1 million Jews. And by the way, the part of Ukraine that Leon's family is from is, for those of you who know anything about it, is in the area that's called the Pale of Settlements. So it was a very great mixture of Jewish and Christian settlements in that area. So that's 1945, and Leon was born in 1946 in a refugee camp. And he comes to the United States as a child, grows up in West St. Paul, becomes a star athlete, eventually gets his degrees from Minnesota College of Art and Design and then the University of Minnesota. And I was just going to read you a little portion of something that R.D. Zimmerman wrote in the catalog, which I highly recommend, and then I'll bring out Leon. Zimmerman wrote this: "It is often said that creativity is born when there is a tear in the fabric of reality. That is, when a loved one dies, we are forced to see a new world, a harsh, stark, and void world which no one else can see, let alone imagine. Or when a family is forced to flee their homes and they must not only grapple with finding simple food and shelter, but struggle emotionally to define and build a new sense of place. Or when you are stripped of your identity and you must not only grieve the loss of the old, but forever question the new." So Leon is a child of that kind of struggle. Leon is fond of saying, when words fail, I paint. And it's true, you don't really need words to understand Leon's work. But let's hope Leon finds some words this evening. Or at least he brought enough paint for everybody. Otherwise, this is going to be really awkward. Please welcome Leon Hushcha.
Добрий вечір і дуже дякую, що ви приїхали. Which in Ukrainian says, good evening and thank you very much for coming.
It will sound better with the microphone.
I hope.
All right. It's on? All right.
It's on. It's
So-
on. Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So all good conversations. All right, so when I first met Leon, he was in the basement of the Thresher Square building. That's where his art studio was. And I was up in the mezzanine, and I went downstairs to have a smoke. It's the only place in the building you could smoke. Those of you who used to smoke, you know what I mean. His door was open one day, and I wandered in, and he very graciously invited me into a conversation about art. And no matter how naive or foolish my comments or questions were, or even my attitude was, he pretty much accepted everything and just invited more conversation.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, so, you know.
And here we sit after that.
We haven't
Another
stopped talking
conversation.
since. I really saw him as an intellectual and an entrepreneur and one of the hardest working people I'd ever met. I mean, this guy came to work every day and painted. I had no idea how he managed to sell the paintings. But what changed our relationship was one day I came down, I had seen an interview with the artist Chuck Close on a TV show, and I was just amazed at how clear his speaking was and how articulate he was and just how well-defined his thoughts were. And I couldn't hardly wait to tell my friend Leon, the artist. So I went down to the studio and I told him this, and Leon looked at me and he said, well, of course, you've seen his work, how would you describe it? And I thought, wow, there's really something I need to know more about this guy, because I'd just been appreciating his work, and I really wanted to know what was ticking behind some of what was going on. So Leon has really never been a name dropper, but he said, well, would you like to meet Mr. Close? And I said, nah, that's okay. I was a little too nervous. So we started talking, and one of the first things I learned about Leon was that he was Ukrainian, and that his parents had emigrated. And to you now, I assume that the world, America, just welcomed your parents with open arms, right?
That's not quite true, but it's close to the truth.
Well, you're an immigrant kid living in St. Paul, and you were part of a community that wasn't really Ukrainian at the time, was it?
No.
So who was there?
I was brought up on the west side, not West St. Paul. West St. Paul borders the west side in St. Paul. And I was brought up in a very poor neighborhood. Let me back up. This is not quite right. I was brought up downtown St. Paul in the slums, which were down from the capital. I was there from the age of 4 to 6. And that's where my parents and myself lived in one room. One room, mom, dad, my brother, and my grandfather, 2 pigeons and a rabbit. One of the pigeons was my first love, and still occasionally comes back when I see pigeons flying around Minneapolis. The story in my family, which was told many times by my mother, was that when I was deathly ill, she, my pigeon, would put her black wing over my chest at night and put me to sleep. That was one of my earlier memories of my life. And when we had to leave there, I wept for a full day. And I hugged the building in the corner of the building with both my arms because we couldn't bring the pigeons with us. So that was really my introduction to America, was that sort of thing. And of course, I was a happy kid, and we didn't know that poverty was bad, but as you all know, it is bad. We had nothing. My father came with no money, and he ended up working for the railroad, where he slipped a disc and was injured quite badly. The good thing was the railroad gave him a job for life, gave him a lifetime job. So that was my introduction to America, and then from there we moved to the West 7th, and we're there for a couple of years, and then the West Side, where I spent a great deal of my life before going to MCAD. The West Side, I lived in a Catholic neighborhood that had very little money. The doors were open, all the families were close, and it was really a lovely upbringing. There was no fear. There was, all this shit we go through today was not there.
So you felt totally integrated into the community then?
I felt that we fit. We fit because we were poor, they were poor, we were poor. It was kind of a nice thing. As a young boy, it made sense, and that's where I began to realize that in order to have your parents accepted, you had to first be accepted by the people your age, which meant sports and fistfights and all that kind of thing, which was really fun back then. But it was a really good lesson, the lesson of the way the world works, the integration thing, which I still think about in regards to the good old days kind of thing. So from there, it's sort of here I am.
Well, there are a few more steps in the process to today, right? I mean, you become an athlete in part, like a lot of kids do, who don't come from, if you want to distinguish yourself, when you come from an immigrant community, one of the great avenues is through sports, and you were lucky enough that you excelled at sports.
Well, that's what I was trying to say, is that if you wanted your parents to be accepted, and after all, when you're young, we all want our parents to be accepted, and we know how that works in neighborhoods. You had to be competitive. So if it was a fist fight, it was a fist fight. If it was a race, it was a race. If it was football, it was football. So I did that. And even though I enjoyed it, I knew what I was doing. I knew that I was doing that for a purpose. And the word purpose, which just slipped out of my mouth, we'll get back to the word purpose, because later on in life, quite recently, I wrote that word down and put it in a nice place in our home where I could see it every day. Because purpose is, without question, what we all seek. Life can be pretty empty, and often is empty, if you don't have something you love to do that you feel is important for your community, or at least your friends. It's what motivates the world one way or another, is purpose. And I don't know how I got on that, but I used the word purpose. So
I said this would be nonlinear. So, so I want to ask about your exposure to art as a kid. Were either of your parents particularly creative or artistic? Was the art that you saw mostly from your church, or?
It's a combination of things, and I think because I mentioned my pigeon, it was something I hadn't thought about for maybe 30 years, but it was obvious. She was an obvious influence on me, my pigeon. My mother had the habit of taking a pencil and drawing a bird without lifting the pencil off the paper, which I found more than amusing, because it always reminded me of my pigeon. And so that was really common when I was a kid. And then when I was about 6, 7 years old, I think 7, my grandfather put a piece of paper in front of my brother and put a piece of paper in front of me, gave us pencils. My brother was 3.5 years older than me, Michael. And he said, draw a horse. And this is the secret that people keep asking me for 50 years. Why do you do horses? Why do you do horses? Okay, I'm confessing tonight. As long as we're all together and we're doing this. So we did. We both drew a horse. And my grandfather looked at the horses and he said, "Te Maya," which means you are the painter, to me. And my brother was 3.5 years older, so it was stunning. And I'll never forget that moment because I had to think about it. From that moment on, in fact, every class I ever had, from third grade on, I was the guy in the class that had to do the I had to do big murals on the chalkboard, the colored chalk. So it was a straightforward heading for who I am now, but it took all these steps in between, obviously. That was the horse story.
Yeah, so you were never actually a closet artist. You were always out there publicly as an artist.
I was born loving it. Painting for me is like praying for some people. It's not much different. It's when I'm alone. It's when I'm with a bigger power. That's when I'm trying to be better. And when a person tries to be better, it doesn't matter what. It's a part of you that you should exercise as often as you can. You can always be better. What does that mean? I don't know. But if you have the need, which I've had since I was a child, it makes life interesting. I mean, I love all the arts because I love painting. Because once you get into painting, you understand music better, you understand writing better, you understand dance. You understand things differently because you understand rhythm. And rhythm basically is the beat of our hearts. And I'm not talking about subliminal, but I am. The way we're controlled by those rhythms that we all have. You've seen people that you thought were boring, but you turn the music on and all of a sudden they can dance in a way that you never imagined because of the rhythm. And painting is not far from that act. And so...
Yeah, so, you had religious art around you. You had your mother's drawings when you were younger, your father's tattoos you've talked about.
Yeah.
But then you get to college and you get exposed to other artists, right? And you have it on your website, and you've talked about artists that have influenced you. And I've gone back and I've looked at their work, and sometimes I can see the influences, and sometimes I really can't. I mean, I can see maybe the influences of color from Tapias's, color work. I can see some of those things, but I'd like you to talk a little bit about how it isn't really a conscious integration. You get influenced by things, right? You get influenced by your heritage, you get influenced by things you see in school, but you really went all out to develop your own style initially. And I'd really like you to talk about this aspect of your work, which I always found fascinating, which is, most people have a really hard time editing their own work or destroying their own work or working or cleaning up their own work to make it better. You've really made a point of attacking your work at times to destroy it so that you could work it over. Can you talk about how that kind of came to be?
Yeah, I can, but before we get there, my original focus when I was at MCAD was making a big space out of a small area. So I was working on like 6-inch by 8-inch materials, and my thinking was, if you can make it like a forever space, a space that could pull you in forever. That was my ambition for a while. And so it was very calligraphic, where I used the chrome and quill, which is a dip pen, and made very fine lines. And I loved doing it. I loved doing it because I did it on cardboard that had been burned by acid. And by burnt, it changed the coloration and made a richness that you can't get any other way. And so that was sort of I almost considered a trick, because by the time I got to graduate school, I had put that away. It was so successful, by the way, it was almost uncanny. And I won't get into that, but that's true. I've been selling my work since I was a sophomore in college. And that was one of the reasons. And I really didn't know what I was doing other than I loved doing it. So when I got to graduate school, I had put that, I dismissed all of that. And I wanted to go in a direction I didn't understand, which I still do to a degree. So one night, when I was in graduate school, after one drink too many, I was painting and it was going badly. So I took the back of my brush and I destroyed the painting. And I fell asleep on the floor. And then I woke up the next morning and I looked at what I had done and I realized it was the best thing I had ever done. I realized that the subconscious was important to me, which I didn't think about before that incident. Then I began to think about, was it important to integrate the two, the subconscious with the conscious? And you see some of that upstairs. You see the result of that first act. The first act was destroying in order to rebuild and do something you weren't prepared for. But you were prepared technically because you'd gone to school and all that crap. And I had been painting since I was 5 years old. So I was used to, painting to me is like, it's what I do. I don't think about, oh, what am I going to do today? I paint. I paint because I love to paint. And plus it puts you in a space that I can't describe to you. I can tell you that you only need to be in that place once or twice a year, maybe even less. That motivates you to keep doing it because that space is so beautiful. That place mentally where you are free. You're absolutely free from everything that you've known before when you're putting these marks down and they're doing something that you didn't expect. I've got many, many, many drawings and paintings in my studio that are half done. The reason they're half done is I get bored. If I know where it's going, I don't see the point. I really don't see the point. If I don't know where it's going, I understand the purpose. I understand I have a purpose. I'm more concerned about what isn't than I'm concerned about what is. What is to me is boring. If you see a painting that's perfectly painted of an apple, tough, I have no love for that. If I see something that looks like an apple that I can see, only I can see, that to me is important.
Well, it's really, as you know, one of the reasons why I've always been so attracted to your work is that it's still breathing. When you're done, there's still life in it. There's always still a surprise, left in it. But I want to talk to you a little bit about, that zone that you're in when you're really doing the stuff that you love. That's really all about you. Whether it's a specific painting or whether sometimes it's some of your very fine drawing. That is so very different from your desire to collaborate with people. Because collaboration, by its nature, means working with somebody else's mind and working with somebody else's ideas in hand. And I know that's been really important to you over the years. In fact, you did a whole show of collaborations. And then after collaborations, I want to talk about commissions, because I think those are yet another way of thinking when you're doing art. But tell me about collaborations.
The collaborations really started years ago. I forget how many years, 16 or whatever. It was, the holidays were coming, and I thought to do something unique for the following that I had created by then. I would ask somebody else if they wanted to collaborate. And I called a friend, and the friend said, "Oh my God, absolutely." And I was stunned by the reaction that the person was so willing and so excited about collaborating, because I think the way we're brought up, maybe not all of us, but the way I was brought up, going back to my athletic deal, is you take great pride in being an individual. And you're taught that. You're taught to be this individual. which is fine, but I think there's room for collaboration. And to make a long story short, I began to call person after person after person after person, and after 16 people heading for my show, my assistant said, if you call one more person, I'm quitting you. And I said, okay, because of course she had to do the catalog, and she had to do all the hard work. I just do the painting. Everybody around me works hard, and I don't consider myself a worker. I consider myself a lucky man, because I literally do what I love to do, and I just can't imagine living any other way. Anyway, that experience of working with those people and having a time limit and having dizzy spells and having to call my wife Sally to pick me up because I couldn't drive, I was so anxiety ridden, that it was so hard on me, but it was so much fun. It was so much fun because you have to be so respectful of the other person. It's not just you anymore. It's you and another person and the way they think and the way they feel. And, so it was a real lesson to me, which translated into a bigger, or let's say larger thinking, which even today, I take that experience, and I think that without global collaboration, we're all screwed. I think if there's ever been a time for that to happen, it's now, which is reflected with Ukraine and this whole problem that we have. So I hope that helps you.
Well, I look at this show and you've got a couple of collaborations upstairs, and I know that was a big turning point for you when you did the big show of collaborations. But then, and I look at this particular show as bringing a lot of things together from your life. One of them, and I know how you struggled with the show a little bit, but it makes me want to talk to you a little bit about doing commissions and how doing a commission is different from just painting. And I don't think I've ever seen you more anxious than when you've taken a commission. It's just because now somebody has a very specific expectation, and sometimes their expectation is based on a bit of symbology. Like, for example, there was a Pepsi company wanted to do something. It's like, well, how do you make the Pepsi logo into a Hushcha, right? Or upstairs you have the Booker portrait upstairs, which is done very much in the style in which you do portraits, which is just kind of flat and kind of, without much depth to background or anything like that. Very much like, I think, like some of the old icons. But every time you've taken a commission, you've done more than one. In fact, I think for the Booker one, I saw you do close to a dozen before you did one that you felt like you could show the client.
Right. I think, when you're young, and a young student, let's say, and you're 18, 19, that kind of age, you're against commissions, you're against a lot of things, because you're supposed to be. Not because you really believe it, but because you're supposed to be a certain way. And commissions is one of those things where people say, well, the client always starts off by saying, you do whatever you want. That's not true. And so it's really hard, but I wanted a few things out of life. One was a billboard, which I did. One was a ceiling, which I did. And one was, something, a mural, which I did, a giant mural. And I test myself with things I don't like a commission, for instance. It's not just for the money. It's for the experience. How am I going to deal with this? How honest am I going to be? How can I deal with another human being who wants me to please them? It's part of life. It's hard. It's hard mentally because anxiety becomes all about the client and not the piece you're working on, and not yourself. You're giving yourself up, and you're going to get beat up. It's very seldom will a client just let you be, and it's very seldom smooth, put it that way. It's very seldom smooth. So
every time you take one, you know you're letting yourself in for it.
some of them are very interesting. When somebody sees something they really love and they say, I would love you to do something in that area. So that allows you to continue doing what you're doing as long as it has other elements that make sense for the client's desire.
Right. But it's finding that balance that's the real challenge.
Balance is a difficult thing, but talking about collaboration, there are two here, Tecumbe Aiken right above me, and I called Tecumbe about, I don't know, a month, 2 months ago, and I hadn't spoken with him in a while, and I said, would you be interested in doing a commission? He said, of course. So we did two of them. That should be of some interest to you people because they're beautiful. The other one is really interesting, is Catherine Switzer. Does anybody here know who Catherine Switzer is? Okay, well, good, because Catherine is a real dear friend of mine, and I wanted, like I said to her, I called her and I said, I need a famous person. And I said, you fit the bill. And she laughed and laughed, and she said, of course I'll do it, but you got to think of what we're going to do. And so I said, okay, give me a couple of weeks. And I really wanted to do something with her because I not only love her, but I'm very proud of her for what she did for this country and for women especially. I mean, she disguised herself as a man and ran the Boston Marathon and was caught in 1967, I believe. And she tried to pass as a man. And because it was so, and I saw it. It was on the Wide World of Sports, black and white TV that I was watching. And I thought, who is this woman? This is fabulous. She's like crazy. And she did it. She's run, I don't know how many marathons, but very, very many she's won. I think one big one, and her husband is Roger Robinson, who at 50 was considered the best marathoner in the world. And how did I meet her? Let me tell you how I met her really briefly. She had met Roger Robinson, the two were a couple, and Roger saw some of my work in Minneapolis at some party. He called me, came to the studio, introduced himself, and said, I would like for you to do a painting in honor of our engagement. I said, sure. And here was the commission thing, right? But here's the beauty of this commission. Roger sends me photographs in New Zealand of Catherine and Roger running through the mountains naked. And I'm like, holy crap. What am I supposed to do with this? And so after some thought, I incorporated them into one of my landscapes, which aren't common. I've done probably 10 in my life. Large, 4 feet by 5 feet. And I'm going to finish this story off quickly because this has a great ending. After this meeting, I'm commissioned to do a mural in St. Paul celebrating the USA finals. Okay? And I'm invited to a big banquet downtown. And I haven't met Catherine yet. And I'm invited to this big banquet, and I'm seated right in front of the microphone, and the very important person behind the microphone, and all the athletes from around the country are there. They're going to run the USA Finals, starts in St. Paul. It's a big deal, and I'm really honored to be there. I'm not only honored, I'm thrilled and scared to death. I'm fairly young back then, and I think, what the hell am I doing here? These are all great people, and I'm just a painter, So I'm seated with about 6 people in a round table in front of the mic. And this woman approaches the table in a red dress, and just gorgeous woman. And she says to me, and I'm across the table, she says, I was just wondering if you'd recognize me with my clothes on. That's how Catherine and I met. And then Sally, my wife, and I have become very close friends with them over the years. But that was our meeting. Can you believe it? So anyway, I ended up thinking about what could I do, what could I do? And I wanted her in this show, and I didn't know what to do. And then one night I'm laying there sleeping, half sleeping, and I'm thinking, am I thinking, and have this anxiety thing going on, and oh, what to do, what to do. I got it. I'll have her write me a letter, and I'll embellish the letter. So I called her the next day and told her, and she was just delighted. And she sent me 2 letters, handwritten in pencil, and then I embellished the one in the corner here. Much to her delight, by the way. She's in New Zealand right now. That's where they live. They live in New Zealand and New York. And she called me the other day and she said, no matter what the price, if somebody wants that painting, you're not to sell it. I will outbid them. So she's getting it as a gift, obviously. But I encourage you to take a look at it. She's such a lovely woman, and she's so important to our country in regards to women athletics.
You've been talking about being Ukrainian for as long as I've known you, and about the challenges of being, having a really Ukrainian household, and on the one hand, and really an American upbringing on the other. It's a very common sort of immigrant, story where there's these two worlds that they're born. But you've always talked about being Ukrainian. You've always talked about the religion and everything, but you've never really done things that were specifically about Ukraine or about your feelings about Ukraine until pretty recently. And I was mentioning color earlier. You develop your own color palette. It's kind of like open tuning. You have your own reds, your own oranges, but you never really used those colors of the Ukrainian flag until recently. And I know when they approached you about doing this show, again, you struggled with how much to express yourself, how much to make it something that was approachable, tangible, understandable by others, versus the art that you really feel you want to make. And what's in the upper gallery up in the back here is truly what I would think of as true Hushcha stuff, right? It's the cut throughs, it's the energy of the motion that goes through the painting, and then you have the goose, the bloodied goose that's flying up there, which is part of your, I won't call it your bag of tricks, but part of your very broad spectrum of art. And then you've got something completely new I've never seen you do, which is the piece with the skull. So just talk about that a little, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for questions.
Okay, fair enough. That the goose, the wounded bird, is a piece I did years ago, all white. It was all white. And I splattered it with paint because I was already thinking anti-war. I've been thinking anti-war my whole life, and I'll just zip back to the way I was brought up. The way I was brought up, my grandfather never spoke one sentence of English. My mother and father never spoke English in the house. I was brought up as a Ukrainian. I was born in Austria. I've never been in Ukraine, which sometimes breaks my heart. So I had 2 lives. I had the life at home, I was Ukrainian, and I had the life outside my home as an American, and I became a citizen in 1971. And I'm an American, and I will be until I go away. But my heart has never been anything but Ukrainian. And so I have heard nothing but this war since I was a child. My parents talked about this war since I was a child. I was born in 46, so from 1950 on, that's why they came here. That's why a lot of immigrants come here, because wherever country they're from is going to, blow to hell, right? And they were talking about the Russians wanting to finish off the Ukrainians. They want to just be done with the Ukrainians. David gave you a little bit of a history there, and in Elena Zelenska, that's a woman. Zelensky is a man, by the way. She said, this is a war against our identity. And that's exactly what it is. And here's the relationship between this sentence and her feelings in my life. I probably spent my whole life trying to create an identity. This is what happens when you're an immigrant in this country. You want an identity, but the Ukrainians didn't really have one until this war. there were a few people you might have known who'd be Ukrainian, Jack Palance being one, who made a fool of himself at the Academy Awards by doing one-arm push-ups. You know, it's like, okay, great, you're Ukrainian, you're doing one-arm push-ups. I mean, what kind of deal is that? Where's... So that in Stalin with the Russification, this is not funny, this is serious. With the Russification, when I meet Ukrainians here in our country, they speak Russian. They don't speak Ukrainian. They're not meant to speak Ukrainian, but Stalin, you know, what, 4 or 5 million starved to death, and then the rest of them had to speak Russian. E-I-E-I-O. So when I was young, one of my burdens was nobody really knew what Ukrainian was. You're not Italian or Irish or French or English, you know what I'm saying? It's pathetic. It was pathetic, and it was that part of my life was very, very difficult. At least now, most people know about Ukraine. Nobody gave it. When they lost 4.5 or 5 million people starved to death, do you think this country gave a shit? Let me tell you something, it didn't. That wheat that they were working on and the Russians were selling to America, nobody gave it. What's the Ukrainian? I have got friends, or had friends, dear friends, who still say I'm a Russian. And my Norwegian friends, which, you know, Minneapolis is full of, so I say, well, you're Swedish then. You know, if I'm Russian, you're Swedish. E-I-E-I-O. I mean, where's the clarity here? Where's the clarity? I mean, you know, I know who I am. I was raised Ukrainian. So I sang Ukrainian songs and I danced. Hopak, Ukrainian dances, for God's sakes. And I'm a Russian. And this is what Elena means, Zelenska. This is what she means. They just want our identity erased. And I think most Jewish people I know understand this because it's the same damn thing. They want it erased. Not just a matter of land. It's erasing a culture. And this is something we should all be really careful about. We should be, you know, right now, you can't be dicking around and saying, arguing, you know, like they're arguing about the border and this and that. And if Ukraine falls, that's the beginning of the end of that whole part of the world. That's the beginning of the end, without a doubt. And they don't really say that as clearly as they could and should. I'm sorry to take your time on that, but go ahead. I couldn't help it.
Does it have anything to do with the art that's here?
Thank you. Those are understandable, the birds and all that. Those skulls are as far away from my mind and my history as can get. I'm driving down the street. I'm driving to the studio. This is, I don't know, a month and a half ago or whatever, 2 months ago, I'm driving in the studio, and all of a sudden I see skulls. I'm like, this never happened to me before. I'm like, skulls? Yes, fill the space with skulls. And I'm, okay. And who am I talking to? Well, God. Well, you know, whatever, God, the concept, me, whatever, however that works, I'm talking. I'm saying yes, yes, yes. I get to the studio. I say to my assistant, Carly, we're going to do skulls today. She said, what? We're going to do skulls. Then we start drawing skulls, and we're doing skulls. And I don't know where it's going. I don't know where it's going. I'm just doing them. In the middle of the painting, I'm thinking, you know, some cultures are really high on that kind of look. But this was going somewhere just of my feelings about war in general. And you know, I'm not for one side. I'm for all sides. There shouldn't be war. And young men and women shouldn't be killing each other for old men's thoughts. So that's where that's from. And the actual painting, the blue and the yellow, that was a last minute thought. Originally, it was just going to be skulls, and I'll leave it up to the interpretation of the viewer. And I had never done anything like that before. And all of a sudden, I was in a different world. So that's that.
That's it. Okay. So with that, we should open it up to questions from all y'all, as they say in the South.
Hi, Leon. I've been following your work for years, long time.
Thank you.
And I have a couple of pieces of yours, which I love very much. And it seems to me that your work had very definitive perspective for a long time. There were a lot of years when you were painting animals, horses, and some fish I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
People, women, and so forth. And I'm just wondering how you changed, how this transition happened when you started painting these very large, layered, you've always done layering, but this is more than ever. These huge paintings that you have here with these layers, and I mean, they're very abstract, more abstract than I've ever seen you do before. And they're sensational, you know.
Thank you.
They're
Thank you.
really sensational.
Thank
and
you.
I just wondered how you moved from really some years of painting with a certain look to a completely different look. I mean, it's thrilling, really.
Thank you. That's a really, really, really good question. And I wonder myself sometimes why I have needs. And sometimes when a painting is bigger than you, it's a whole different experience. You know, there's a painting that you control because it's smaller than you, you're painting inside it. When you're painting large, it's a whole different experience. And because of my feelings towards the war, I knew I had to do at least one or two that were bigger than me because the war is bigger than me. That's what happened. And I hope that answers your question a little bit. And thank you, by the way, for having some of my work.
Yeah, he's your old friend. I've seen you go through a lot of changes over the years. I'm just wondering where your path is going to take you next.
That's a really good question. I have no clue, and I mean that sincerely. I've been thinking about drawing again with a pencil. I just like the act of doing. In that the act itself is motivation enough for me because it puts me in a place other than where we're at right now, reality. You have reality, and then you have the space I was talking about earlier is a very spiritual space. It's a space that only you can enter. This is not a shared space. This is something you hit on maybe, like I said, once a year, once every 2 years. At that moment, you understand things. Generally speaking, we don't understand anything.
Pravit Leon Hushcha, thank you for tonight's event. Question for you. I know you've spent some time out in nature and picked up driftwood and other pieces. Can you kind of talk about how nature speaks to you and how you transition some of those items into your work?
Yes, I can very well answer that. A dear friend of mine is Donald Garr, who lives in Hayward, near Hayward. He lives in Spring Brook, Wisconsin. And Don and I met in 1966. We were both painting back then, and he started as a painter. But when he moved to that part of Wisconsin, he started dealing with nature more, and I had a studio there. And so him and I would drive around, and it's kind of a lovely way to think. He would look at a tree and say, well, when that falls apart, I think I can see the back end of a deer, and the leaves are still on it. And you start thinking, oh my God, this is a whole different palette. So nature's a palette for someone like Don Garr, guys who work with wood. And so I would work in that studio, and I would carve fish during the summer, and then during the winter, I would paint them in my studio. And I don't do that anymore because I lost my studio. But that's where it's sort of from. That connection with nature is literally, nature is your palette. And as you know, historically, there's nothing without that. I mean, that's everything that you see is invented, and nature is the purest form of that invention.
Hello. I have questions about your studio.
Okay.
So I was wondering if in your studio you have objects that are always with you, or when you're starting a new project, do you bring all new things in?
It's a really good question, and most people don't know this, but I will leave certain paintings around for 4, 5, 6 years, and I will look at them every day. I won't touch them. I will look at them, and I will get on with what I'm working on. And the hope is that some moment, the right feeling, the right day, the whole deal, you all of a sudden understand it. You understand in a way you've never understood it. We all grow, we all change. Every moment of our life, we change. And you have to allow yourself that freedom. If you ever, like, I've been lucky and fortunate enough to have a studio most of my life. I've been painting for over 50 years. I did a commencement speech at the Minneapolis College of Art 50 years after I graduated. Half a century. I mean, you know, I'm just really a fortunate guy. So I leave things around hoping that they hit me. And when they hit me, then I go back to them. There are some paintings I have 3, 4 dates on where I've changed it, where it's, you know, it's never complete. It's never satisfies me.
Is there any living artists that you like, and why?
Artists that I like?
Yes, living artists, not discriminating against dead artists, but living artists.
I'm not really up to today's artists. I gave up years ago. I don't read art news and that shit. Here's why. Most of it's crap because it's about money. It's about the critic. It's about the bureaucracy. Everyone's making a buck, except the artists. And so I don't have great admiration for anybody right now, other than a few local artists. I think Tacumba is really good. I think Zoran is really a great sculptor. I think we're lucky to have him in the community. I think, we've got ample artists. And by the way, when you talk about the president, I think Kandinsky comes to mind. I don't know why, but I just want to mention that the twittering machine is one of my favorite paintings. So anyway, any other questions?
Yes. Leon, in several of your paintings here, I see a column, and I think of the birch tree up here, which is one of my favorites. But I see a column in several of the paintings, and is there significance to that? Yeah,
there is. Thanks for asking. My first show here, which was I think 6, 7 years ago, I did a triptych for that space up there, which is underneath the bird, and I did 3 paintings. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I needed something that people could see from down here, up there, and it has some power. And I did yellow, red, and blue, I think. But I did a line in the center, and I wasn't sure why I did it. But I called it Giacometti's Fantasy. And as you know, Giacometti did many thin things, because he'd seen a bicycle make a corner and it turned into a line. That's his, philosophy. And I've always liked Giacometti. So I did these 3 paintings using a line, kind of using his thinking in regards to the line. And then I ripped through them, in my way, in a Hushcha way, and then I repainted them. But what I realized after that, because I continued doing that, is by separating the painting in the center, I was forcing the viewer to do what I wanted them to do. And you go right into the center of the painting, and then you go up and down. It's just like I'm not going to call it a trick. I think it's a great realization on my part after painting my whole life. And so I've continued it off and on. I don't use it all the time. I'm working on painting right now that I think is dramatically beautiful because of that notion.
I have a question, Leon. As you know, Amy and I have acquired some of your art over the years, and I know this is a museum and not an art sale, but there's a number of pieces upstairs that say property of Leon Hushcha or property of Hushcha Studio. Are those pieces available for sale?
Well, thanks for bringing that up, because that's how I pay the rent. and of course they are, and you just have to locate Hushcha's studio, and give me a call or give me an email or give me a, Yes, thank you for asking. By the way, that's.
Great question. Nobody mentioned. You use some wonderful language to describe your own creative act. I'm interested very much in the connection between your poetry and your art. First, is there a connection? Because there's some, in some cases there are pieces upstairs that also connect us to some beautiful poetic jokes or even something really profound and moving. And I was just curious, what connection do you see?
Thank you. There's a huge connection. There's a huge connection. Years ago, I was publishing online Spittle off the lip of the maestro. Spittle off the lip of the maestro was a conversation between the maestro and myself, and it allowed me to talk about painting, in a kind of a clever, theatrical way. And then I quit doing that. But some of those things that you read are from the original ones. And dating back, 1970, 71, I took a year off of painting and I did poetry readings. I was a poet for a year. And I was a good one, don't laugh. I would do it right now, but they don't fit this date anymore. Anyway, so that's where it's from. I ran into like Garrison Keillor and Mike Brown, and there's about 5 kind of major poets in town. I started running around with them, and I thought it would be good for me. And what I found, because painters like to bitch a lot, and rightfully so. And what I found after, I think I did 5 readings around that. We sold out the Walker, we sold out the Cedar Theater. We're damn good. But what I found out was they were worse than painters, because they're more clever, and they're really good with the word. And a lot of painters don't give a shit about the word. They just, and so I had fun. It was really fun. It was like a year of my life. And I went back to painting, of course. But that's where it's from. That's those poems. And I still drive and do poetry in my brain, in my head. All the time. Yeah. So thanks for asking. I like that.
Leon, you can't walk through our main living area of our house without seeing a Hushcha. And some of them are my favorites, that are my favorites, that you have collaborated with Don Gar.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, you can't sit at our dining room table without seeing a fish.
Well, I used to love to do fish and little animals, during the summer, and then in the winter I would do the painting.
But I have a heart.
Oh yeah, I did hearts too.
That you did, Don Gar, and we did
Together.
And it is just absolutely magnificent.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything that's in our house.
Oh my God, thank you. That makes my night. Thank you.
My wife Dorothy and I met you and Sally probably 50 years ago, 40, at least 40, and I think it's close to 50. No. Well, it was 1972. 73.
No, I didn't meet her, and we didn't get married until 84.
We were after marriage, and it happened in 3 days, 3 different weddings. How many weddings did you have?
Oh,
Yeah, tell me.
Leon, I have a question for you. Is that okay? I work at the museum, and we've had the honor of working together a number of times over a number of exhibitions over the years. And as we put together this particular exhibition, and you and I were in touch as the invasion happened and your feelings about it, and as all of this came to be, I just want to know if there's any spiritual space that you've been experiencing as the conflict has gone on and your exhibition is on view at the Museum of Russian Art?
Well, that's a great question. That again, this fact that I've never been in Ukraine, but I'm Ukrainian, is a really interesting thing for me, because when I heard about the war, I broke down. Now, why would I break down? I've never even been there. And by the way, I have no relatives. My father spent 11 years in prison back there. And my mother married him when he got out of prison. And then I was raised with this severe opinion about the Russians. So the spiritual aspect would come from, I've been going to the Eastern Ukrainian Church since I was 5 years old, 6 years old. I realized maybe 20 years ago, something like that, maybe less, doesn't matter. I realized that what church gave me was the candles and the incense and the gold. And I remember as a kid, I would leave my body, which is very similar to what I was trying to describe in regards to painting. But I would literally leave my body in church oftentimes. So you can call that what you want to call it, but I know that's a huge influence. If you look at some of my paintings in the borders, and I didn't even realize that for years and years until I started putting it together. It was because of what I was looking at in church as a young boy. And I was looking at a very decorative, by the way, not to change the subject, but only one person has ever said to me, "Are you still doing flat space?" Think about this. 50 years I'm painting in Minneapolis, nobody ever mentions the fact I do flat space. Sia Armajani, after I hadn't seen him for 2 years, we ran into each other and he said to me, "Are you still doing the flat space?" And when I'm looking up there, I'm looking underneath the bird, those are flat. And very few people paint this way. And so the influence is icons, and very Eastern oriented. So that's a great question. Thank you.
We're happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
One last toast to you, my friend.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. And thank all of you for coming. Love this.